Ambassador Boaz Mbaya, the first out of the gate when it comes to documenting Kenya's foreign policy and diplomacy, a very rich repository of knowledge when it comes to issues to do with diplomacy and foreign policy that you need to grab a copy, especially if you're a student of international affairs and diplomacy. This will be a good read for you as well, because it hacks back into history and tells us how this has actually morphed into with different regimes. Of course, people and different leaders had different philosophies that, people were tagging along, and the feeling there was a spirit of cohesion as well. But let's just begin with Boaz, just to tell us, because this book is a compilation of reflections by retired Kenyan ambassadors during a symposium of Kenya's early diplomacy in 1963 to 1993, held on the 16th and 17th September 2009. And published by the Foreign Service Institute, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Is this where actually the dream was morphed? You can give us a bit of history.
I don't think so. I think that is a content of a different book by a former colleague as well.
Yes.
Dr. Cheruget, Kipyego Cheruget. He has done, I think it is Kenya's 50 years of diplomatic engagement. But this came out of my dream in a way to a point where I wanted to share my experience with the public. But in doing so, I had to be also very careful what line I towed. As a senior public officer, I have an oath of office which still holds up to today. So what did I have to pass on to the public, and what was it that should remain with me until my last breath on this earth? So I think it is important to appreciate the fact that I took the challenge to try and be the first person to write this book. And I took that challenge out of the 2010 Constitution, which gives us the opportunity to express ourselves much more freely. I don't think I could have done this book before that time. So there are a number of parameters that inform the writing of this book. But I think I want to believe that Kenyans will find it useful, and they'll find it resourceful in terms of understanding our foreign policy. Yes.
All right, but let's buckle down to it with our panelists as well. Most of us have read it and want us to contribute. You can ask questions or share your contribution as well. We begin with generally where we are as a country with the foreign policy. And I just read a snippet of it where we are on the horn of dilemma when it came to, of course, Uganda trying to get some of our territory there, is when we realized we need actually a robust foreign policy. But it has taken donkey years for us to actually publish even our own foreign policy. Hashi, to begin with you.
Well, Debal, if I can speak to Ambassador Baya's book, let me tell you the things that I quickly agree with. The things that I quickly agree with is that we should have a foreign minister who stays for 2 terms. I firmly believe that...
For 2 terms?
For 2 terms. A minister who stays at their post and develops their foreign policy, their contacts, their bureaucratic nuances, their ideological bend, and all these things. I think this is very critical because, if you look, Mr. Ambassador Boaz has shown us, and this is also in the public domain, how many foreign ministers we've changed. I can tell you that that's a very critical point that I agree with. That's one. Second, another point that I agree with is that there's a lot of failed politicians who stand for an election and get taken to State House and cut deals and made ambassador to Burma or ambassador to this country or that country. I think that
on appointments,
yes. So the political appointments, I agree that the president should make political appointments, right? But maybe they should constitute about 25% of those appointments. They should not constitute the overall majority of the country. And I think that career diplomats should be given the chance to move up and go into these posts. I think that that will happen. However, there's a point to that issue, is that career diplomats are also not politicians. And the diplomatic posts that are sensitive needs people who have a sense of the political economy of how politics works in the world of diplomacy. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite foreign ministers was Monyo Oyaki. Long-standing, the late Monyo Oyaki, long-standing foreign minister, and he was a diplomat par excellence, but was also a politician. And I'll tell you why I disagree with Ambassador Boas on his realist thrust. It's unfortunate that you're sitting next to me, Ambassador. I wish I could say it while you're not here. It would be disingenuous of us as very senior people not to add maybe a disagreement, one or two, for us to make the book even better, because the whole process of writing, and I've had this, is to get positive feedback and also get some improvements on the thing. So on a theoretical level, I think that, this idea that the realist school holds in foreign policy is not, I think it's just overestimated. I think that a mixture of the idealist traditions and the realist traditions comes up with something called the neo-realist school of thought. And what that suggests is for us to understand our political economy in this country and in this region, and then project our foreign policy in that manner. And a concrete example. There was a time that Charles Njonjo was dallying and dealing with apartheid South Africa. I mean, in the national interest of Kenya, we would have made billions and billions and billions of dollars trading with South Africa, but it was an apartheid state that excluded black people from ruling their country. And the late Monyo Oyaki said, over my dead body, right in front of the President Jomo Kenyatta, the late President Jomo Kenyatta, that will happen over my dead body. He was not thinking of the national interest then. He was thinking that the traditions of Kenya was anti-colonial, anti-apartheid, and we were not going to sell our souls of business, and that we were going to stand with the people of South Africa at their time of need. And Mr. Oyaki won the day in cabinet. That was not a realist school of thought, that was an idealist school of thought. So there are times, and many, many times if not, more than usual, where the realism of how we're going to do business and how we're going to do diplomacy is punctured by our moral directions and our moral convictions, where we say, no, we are not going to do this. One of the things about it was, they say, The Hague. I firmly opposed that thing because I believed that it had no business doing those things, that we had to do things ourselves here. We were accused of not following the rule of law, probably true to a certain extent. But our African personality was involved, and it was a biased court, and we said no.
Thank you.
Last point, Jabal, one critical last point. I also think that Mr. Ambassador Mbaya's book is an excellent book. I think it's important contribution to a handbook for foreign officers. I think this book should be distributed to everybody in the Foreign Office and to all the cadets who are going to deal with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I congratulate him for this new book, and I hope that he's got these free copies to give the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or maybe they should just buy it from you. But I think it's an important...
Free copies, I think he's actually spent a lot of money in publishing as well. But you raise critical points about also the times of the foreign ministers. They should be extended for continuity's sake, because you come up with good policies at the end of the day, but the person who picks up the baton or throw them down the tube, and then you have to actually begin from, from the lower ground as well. But appointment, which is critical as well, you say in your book, and this is on page 35, if my director Diana may just pick up that, you say on page 35 that there at the end, the quality of a country's diplomacy is critical to its articulation of a successful foreign policy. Regional or ethnic balance should not be the primary criteria in selecting persons for appointment or to diplomatic posts. It could be achieved at initial recruitment stages to enable the officers undertake appropriate training in preparation for a career in foreign service. And of course, this has been also a catnip issue in the country as far as political appointments are concerned. People who are not really qualified. How does it also affect the articulation of, our diplomacy? Let's hear from Hassan Khanenji on this. Not necessarily Liz, but what you pick out from the book and you want to tease out this morning with our panelists.
It's interesting you went to page 35 because actually I had noted that point too.
Oh, really?
And I was going to bring it up. Now, world over, you're always going to have a degree of political appointments within the foreign service. Kenya is not the first country to do that. But the quality of those appointments do matter. The willingness and readiness for those especially political appointees, to listen to bureaucrats is critical, especially who work within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Because in the absence of that, that is when you're going to have very ad hoc decisions. You may have representatives who do not understand the national interests of the country because they're not sufficiently engaged or do not have the understanding of how to advance it or even what to advance to start with. And a lot of us who've lived in foreign countries, we've also engaged, we've come across some of those political appointees in certain forums, and you are sad for your country.
Absolutely.
Extremely sad. Yeah, and you become literally the ambassador in that forum for your country, even though that's not your designation. You're probably just a private citizen who is patriotic and who loves his or her country. And so that is important, and I agree. Regional balance should not be the determining factor, the issue, when it comes to foreign policy. I have said on this panel.
Maybe that's why we have the census, and we have it also ethnic biased. Oh, Hashi is from the Somali community. How many Somalis do we have? Regional balance. Also, the appointment will also
smart countries understand that successful foreign policy is going to bring home a lot of bacon in the West of America.
Very good.
It can advance domestic policy in ways in which other local actors cannot. And so if you do not have competent and qualified personnel to represent the country, you're going to bring home much less, close to nothing. Actually becomes a net liability. Now, moving away from that, some countries, and which I think the ambassador mentions in the book, they have some kind of a quota system that balances maybe 70-30 or 80-20 in favor of professional bureaucrats. But those people, a lot of times, they're actually willing to go with the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy has to be more powerful than the political appointee. Because if it's not, then what happens is this person may advance an agenda that is not in line with the country's national interest. Bureaucrats who've been in place for a long time understand certain things. They've been practicing for a very long time. They understand countries, they understand how systems work. Now, if we don't even give them a chance to be able to actually rise up there, they're human beings who are going to get demoralized. And they may be fearful of even being open and independent. And when you do that, that is when you're going to run afoul of so many things. And so some kind of a balance has to be struck, and we ensure that the quality of political appointees, not just because someone has run an election, and some of these people perhaps may not even be able to write a paragraph in English, let alone in Swahili, which they can't even speak. It's true.
It's true.
Yeah, it becomes dangerous actually for a country. Now, important for Kenya is a highly respected country internationally, but without having appropriate personnel to actually advance those interests, we can't get them, even though, we are pretty good. And so we may sit back and wonder, how come these countries do not vote with us? We thought they were friends. No, sometimes it's the quality of representation in those countries or in those forums. If we are in international forum and let's say, someone is busy dozing off, or you show up, your opponents, all of them have writing pads and stuff like that, and you're just sitting there not even taking notes, how can you actually exchange things? How can you be able to report back to your home country about what took place? So I think it's very important, and it's something that is critical, even though I would like to add, just looking at the budget, I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not take sufficient resources, or rather does not get sufficient resources to be able to advance our national foreign policy. And I think that is something that has to be re-examined.
All right. Let's say from Ambassador Rasas Mwencha.
Okay.
What you picked out, sir?
No, the question is, I think for any Kenyan out there would ask, why are we talking about foreign policy? Because foreign policy has impact on the country's economy, because you engage in foreign policy because you want to improve the welfare of your people, to be able to trade, to be able to help your Kenyans who are abroad to do business, but also to secure your boundaries and also to make sure that your peace and your national state is secured. Now, if you look through this work that Boaz has done, he has shown how when you want to project your values to the international community, as a country, you must be coherent, you must be strong. And I think that failure as of a country, what we are discussing now, to be able to be a nation state comes out clear. That Kenya's weakness abroad has also, and I'm going to give two instances of that. One of them is to do with, say, regional integration, and that's at least the angle that I come from. Kenya sometimes found itself, herself isolated because we pursued very narrow interests. Let me go back, step back, and talk about the early years, and the role the foreign, entities played in our country, namely, for instance, the West. Because although Kenya said that we are going to be non-aligned, but in actual fact, we were aligned to the West. And you can see a very heavy role of the Americans, right from 1966, Atwood, the Remote Conference, which was a defining moment,
yes,
where they then maneuvered and make sure that you rig out all those other, politicians,
yes,
who were trying to move to the left. And you see the context in which Kenya was developing its policy was very complicated. Our neighbor Tanzania was left, Uganda was moving to the left, Kenya was right. That started isolating Kenya. But I must say one thing, the right choice Mr. Jomo Kenyatta made. Because having lived out there and having seen the countries that tried to go left,
yes,
the economies were battered, because whereas Russia and others supported these countries to gain independence, they were not able to help them to gain economic capacity. And so that was a drawback, and I think we congratulate Kenya's choice for that. But then Kenya's choice has failed in one area, and I want to agree with Ambassador Mbaya on this, in supporting, having that nationalistic, we are, a nation-based, that as a Kenyan sometimes abroad, we carry our burden out there,
yes,
our baggage. And so you will not even get support of a Kenyan. If you look at Kenyans, say, in the UN systems, in international organizations, they are far in between. In fact, he gives a case of, the class case he gives is when I was seeking for the position of African Union. Or, by mistake, by the way, you say deputy commissioner doesn't exist. I was looking for the position of deputy chairperson. Kenya goes out there and puts 3 candidates.
Terrible.
Yeah.
3 candidates.
Very bad.
It is there, page 184. And that, people start asking, this capitalistic tendency that there are only 10 posts for the commission, and Kenya is looking for 3 of them. I mean, that shows you the lack of strategy at the national level, and it also shows the lack of that diplomacy. And I think the one thing that is also very clear that comes out of this document is that even when we have had raw moments, we must also be sensitive to international environment. The Moi regime failed to recognize the post-Cold War, and because he failed to see that,
thank you,
we went through pains.
Thank you. We shall actually go successfully from Jomo Kenyatta to Moi to Mwai Kibaki,
yes,
and lastly Uhuru Kenyatta, as far as also their foreign policy configuration was concerned when they took office as well. But let's say from Naomi Damba briefly on this as well. What did you pick out? Maybe we can tease out this morning with our panelists.
Dubal, where I think my contribution can be helpful is, let's lift it, this discussion to what we call the world context, and then now focus on the contribution Mbaya has made. And my take off on this are areas where I thought the book can be improved, or more work need to be done. First of all, divide the world into about 4 areas. Henry Kissinger called diplomacy as a supreme, powerful instrument of foreign policy. And if you divide the world into 4 areas, we basically came from area called multipolar world, where the Europeans dominated the world, dictate what needs to happen to the rest of the world.
Multiple world?
Multiple world. And they divided Africa into European interest. And then we moved from that area to what we call bipolar world, and that is the Soviet Union versus United States, and then divide the world interest. And the third stage we move to is unipolar world, where the U.S. and this post-world Second World War, where the U.S. became the most dominant in the world. And now we are merging into an area which I will call tripolar world. We have Russia emerging, we have China projecting its power, and we have American defending what they have done for a long time. So it's a very interesting context to look at what stage to go into. And I think Bayer has done an excellent job examining each pieces of diplomacy and foreign policy that we have had since 1963 to now, and to put it in this context. My departure, what I thought that we need to work more on, Ambassador Mbaya, is the role of sport in what I call externality, the role of sport in projecting the image of Kenya. We talk about football, but long distance, we are long distance runners.
Sports
diplomacy. We ought to be able to sing and scream about we're distant runner and why the reason. The book could have benefited from and really enrich critical analysis of what I call major trading partners versus favorable trading partners. China is not a favorable trading partners because it's leaving us with significant imbalance of trade, whereas Uganda is a favorable trading partner because Kenya is largely benefited from that. Third point, Dubal, is the role of diaspora. Diaspora,
yes.
Major, Bayer begin to talk about that, but we need to address the legal framework in terms of diaspora. That's what Switzerland has done for years.
Thank you.
And the last point, the ultimate question, are we working for an integrated East Africa political federation or not?
Good question, and of course we shall be answering that as well. So let's go back to you, Ambassador Mbaya, and on page 39 of your book, you actually give, because Noah has actually broken down for us the 4 regions of the world: multipolar, bipolar, unipolar, tripolar, and we started off where the international dynamics at independence. And this is where President Jomo Kenyatta picked up from. And you say Kenya's independence at the height of the Cold War meant that it faced difficult choices on which path to take in its foreign policy. We were caught up, at the sharp edge of the horn of dilemma. The rivalry between the U.S. and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, then created diplomatic hurdles Kenya needed to overcome so as to advance its economic agenda. The founding fathers opted for a non-allied policy through which Kenya was to maintain friendship with and benefit from both the West and the East. Non-alignment helped Kenya achieve 2 goals. First, the country articulated pragmatic foreign policy, which steered it away from confrontation with its Western economic development partners. Second, Kenya maintained good relations with East and the developing countries allied to it as well. But that is also where we were tangled up because of a non-alignment sort of policy that we've always been fronting. And we had, I think also in the book you talk about looking west and looking east. Yeah. And of course, we've seen different presidents coming and saying, now we've been looking west, we want now to look east. But how did we configure also foreign policy as well? Maybe you can feed into this. How are we caught up into this non-alignment policy?
I think first of all, I'll begin at independence itself. Kenya joined the Community of Nations as a revolutionary state. A revolutionary state because of the manner in which we attained our independence, through armed struggle. And President Kenyatta, then Prime Minister, quickly realized he had to compromise with a lot of things to get the country going economically.
Yes.
He adopted a non-aligned policy, but more so, it was non-aligned yet market-oriented.
Correct.
Market-oriented because then it attracted investment from development partners, unlike the socialist rhetoric which was being shouted across Africa. And when you look at session paper number 10, it says, the title actually is African Socialism, Its Application to Planning in Kenya. There is nothing socialistic about that document, basically, there isn't. But it was within the parameters of the political live debate at that particular time.
Yes.
So this book raises a debate on how Kenya has evolved, and its foreign policy began to evolve from that particular time. We wanted to benefit from both sides, but more so we did not want to create enemies from the other side. I think that is more the point about non-alignment. We did not want to create enemies on the other side. So it was possible to have a peaceful development, economic development, at the same time relate diplomatically to both the East and the West. That's point number one. Number two, I want to raise the issue that the evolution of our foreign policy began at that particular time.
Okay.
Because we had to respond to the dynamics of the time, international dynamics of the time. If we took a wrong choice, we would have landed in the same problems that Marxist, quote-unquote, countries in Africa landed in.
True.
And I think Jomo Kenyatta was a very clever politician. There were policy differences between him and Oginga Odinga, his vice president.
And we'll look into that as well.
Yeah, there were policy differences. They all agreed on non-alignment, but from so that evolution helped us address the international situation at that time. When it came to end of Cold War, we did not learn. And we continued to think we were the blue-eyed boys of the West. And that's how we got into problems.
Right.
So I think we have to look at Kenya's foreign policy in the manner in which it has responded to the international dynamics.
And of course, we can also say that from the non-allied policies, when we had also the benefit of actually hosting the UN here in the country, because you say that this equilibrium helped it negotiate the rights to host UNEP and UN Habitat in 1972 and 1974, and we are the only country, the only developing country in the world that actually is hosting the United Nations also here in Africa. And this was the benefit of this actually non-alignment policy that was taken. But let's just get to Hashi and discuss the Odinga and the Jomo Kenyatta then with this particular non-alignment policy. You say there were differences at some point.
That Ambassador Boards brought this, Mbaya brought this debate up. You know, the one thing about that time that there was an ideological debate. At least people had positions during that time. So it's a testament to our times today that the new politics is about Nyaribari Chache or Garissa, and the ideological bend of our politicians is unknown. It is true that Mr. President Kenyatta, the senior, took a position that was correct, in my view, to have a free market economy and allied himself with the West. It was a very decisive move. However, it is also the bane or the cause of much of the trouble that we have here today. Because the great and late Julius Nyerere took the opposite direction. And one of the things that Tanzania has today is a nation because of those decisions that he took. And when Jomo position, the byproduct of us was this tribal pantheons that we have today. And it is important to state that Jaramogi Odinga wanted to take us to the left. However, he was not in power. He was second in command, and he paid for that price in Limuru. I believe that Tanzania today has a basis for an economic takeover with a trajectory that probably is going to be greater than Kenya. Because while we're trying to solve our nation-state issues here, the Tanzanians are trying to solve their economic issues, which is less, it is harder to deal with the issues of the nation-state and a bit easier to deal with the issues of the economy. So our first president decided that, we're going to deal with the economy, we're going to become strong, we're going to become powerful. And today, Kenya is the engine, the hub, the largest economy in this region. It is, without Kenya, it is the anchor and the linchpin of this region. Without Kenya, there is no region. So the discussion that we need to have about our policy today should be based on one fundamental tenet. And that tenet is, who are we, where did we come from, and where are we going? And I agree with Ambassador, with the chairman here, that one of the things that we need to put down is, I'm not sure we need so much foreign policy towards Europe and America. What we need is a foreign policy that is regional, that is African, for us to try and develop a way in which our economy can move out of the doldrums that we have. And once we reach a certain economic level, our diplomatic thrusts will also be quite important in the international era. I think that if you don't have an economy to speak of, you're not going to have a diplomacy to speak of.
That's true.
So I believe fundamentally that, as my colleagues have said, my learned friends here have said, is that this region, I've said many times before, has to be opened up. We have to have one currency. We had one currency. I think some of my elder friends here remember the East African shilling.
Yes.
We had an East African community. And if you look at the economic charts at that time, it's just mind-blowing how the curve on the economy was moving. We need to do that, and we need to realize that we have a common home here in East Africa that includes about 10 states, and that these sovereign states that we have today don't make sense in the 21st century as models of economic, political, and diplomatic growth.
Correct.
All right. All right, and of course, also we discover from their own foreign policy, they also had a rallying philosophy. From Jomo Kenyatta to Daniel Arap Moi, Mwai Kibaki, we're still yet to figure out what the philosophy of Uhuru Kenyatta is as far as the foreign policy. But they had a mantra. Harambee was Jomo Kenyatta's. And how did also the spirit of Harambee, as a philosophy, brought cohesion and, of course, Kenyans sort of having a needle that is pointing to the true north? Dr. Hassan Khonenje. And how pivotal is it maybe for you to have a philosophy that people can rally around?
Well, it's always important to have a philosophy. Of course, I remember the loyalty pledge used to be about the Nyayo philosophy at the time. Now, Harambee was a necessity. It was a system of self-help, was advanced by the founding president. It is actually something that despite its misgivings, it was so successful that it's been studied by a lot of countries, especially coming from either independence or, in the case of the former Soviet republics, Russia. I met lots of scholars who've studied Harambee, and every time I mention from Kenya, they say, Harambee, can you tell us more about Harambee?
It's an Indian word, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now I just learned something.
The Harambee, the Harambee god.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's true that there has to be certain guiding principles which can be encapsulated in a philosophy, which informs the philosophy of a country. And we know that for 50 years, we didn't exactly have a foreign policy, even though we have certain philosophies of various presidents. And sometimes it wasn't explicitly spelled out as a philosophy, but it had to be concluded, or at least from inference, by the scholars, practitioners who are doing it, that this is actually the philosophy that is informing our country going forward. Now, we know that post-Kibaki era, we're still trying to define what the philosophy is. And of course, we also understand the nature or the circumstances around the post-Kibaki era. And I think the country for some time was grappling with its own internal problems, right. Grappling with the ICC, we're grappling with a lot of things. But increasingly, especially in the second term of President Uhuru, I think it's emerging certain dimensions. And you can see, in fact, I've been actually very happy with what the president was doing in the Caribbean.
Yes,
recently.
I agree with you.
That was absolutely awesome. Revolutionary.
Kudos
I followed
to our
it.
current foreign minister.
Foreign
who's
minister.
Doing a good job towards that.
This is something we should do more proactively. And even as people talk about the declining role of Kenya's diplomacy, we are still the most indispensable country in this region. Now, I will beg to disagree a little bit that there won't be a region without Kenya. No, there'll be a region. It's just going to be less significant, international relations than it is today. There's going to be a region, and I think the president has recognized also the importance, and kudos again, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, what he's doing as the minister in trying to be more aggressive. some of the things that Kenya is actually entitled to in the international arena, we've missed them out in part because we've been as less aggressive and robust and intentional as we should be. Now, moving beyond, one of the chapters that I would have loved to see, it's only about a page, is the future of Kenya's foreign policy. Because we've talked about the empirical, what is, we need to move to what ought to be.
Good point.
You have a contribution?
Yes.
I wanted also to focus where the difference also occurs, because I know you wanted to focus maybe originally the differences between the Odingas and the Kenyatas then, as far as this foreign policy is concerned, and how that friction began then, even from a foreign policy point of view.
Okay.
Yeah, him wanted that is Odinga wanted the communism sort of approach to governance. Of course, we are looking the other way, to the West as well. And how did this really contribute to, sort of the frictions that we do have here today? Hashi, then we can hear also from Boaz briefly.
Thank you.
We'll come to you.
I'm glad you put that question to me. Jaramogi Odinga owned buses and he owned businesses in Kisumu. Julius Nyerere used to say that only in Kenya socialists have business. So, it is not quite true to put the late Jaramogi Odinga into the very far left. He was a very pragmatic politician to a certain extent, but he was really an African nationalist. And what motivated him deeply was freedom for the country and freedom for the continent. That is what really motivated the late Odinga. It motivated Jomo Kenyatta as well. You know that Jaramogi Odinga was appointed prime minister by the governor, and while President Kenyatta, former late President Kenyatta, was in jail, and he said no. He said, "The father of the nation is in jail, and I'm not going to take that seat until he comes out." So they were joined at the hip. They were really joined at the hip. The differences were the wedges of the Cold War that broke them apart. I really don't think that they broke apart. There were larger powers that came into Kenyan domestic politics. And they broke these two great founding leaders of our country. And it's Jaramogi Odinga who paid the price. I think that if on that day, and you know that, Debal, we're trying to make the handshake work. In a way, as a country, we're trying to go back to our founding day, so that the two men who are the founders of this nation and their sons today, we're metaphorically going back there and saying, look, we made a mistake by dividing ourselves on that day. Let us come together today so that this country can move to the next step, so that the bridges can be built and we can move to a new generation and solve the old problems. I don't know, it's going to be very difficult. But I think if these two leaders really stick to each other for the next 5 to probably 10 years, we may be able to build this bridge.
Thank you.
And that bridge is also going to inform our diplomacy today.
Thank you.
Going to inform it.
Right, let's hear from Ambassador Erastus Moncha.
Yeah. Boaz opens the book by saying that Kenya as a state starts as a nationalist, a revolutionary state. Why? Because the struggle for independence had issues. One of them was land. Yeah. And I think that was one of the defining moments of how Kenya then decided. Of course, the British who were in Kenya and who were owners of large tracts of land were threatening to affect the economy if they left en masse, like what happened in Zimbabwe and even South Africa. And Kenyatta's statement in Nakuru was epical. He addressed the farmers and they said Kenya was not going to nationalize the land, and Kenya was going to go on a policy of willing buyer, willing seller. That was a defining. And I think this was also the genesis of the disagreement, because many felt that having fought on this ticket of land, there should have been a fairer distribution of the land. Right. And then, of course, as he says, the foreign entity, you remember then when now Kenya had also moved to a one-party state, because at independence, Kenya had Kadu and Kanu, and the Kadu was seen as, maybe a spoiler or whatever it was. But soon we now form a one-party state. As we form a one-party state, the elements within there wanted now to get rid of those who are leaning to the east and hence the Remur conference. And you see American ambassador in attendance, working with Paul Mboya to get rid of all this. And that's when now the ranks broke. Although philosophically we say they were close. Having taken these separate parts, Kenya gets into the pain now of tribalism, which continues to. And I think there is also another point that Ambassador has brought out in his book, and that is the corruption.
Corruption. Could we hold on? No, the corruption we hear from because we'll delve. I want us to go sequentially. Let's just hear from Professor Nomidamba.
I want to go back to the point that that Hassan. No, Hashi is you. Kanenje projected, and then I will tie up with what Hashi is saying. We must understand the context on which we are. Okay, the projection is the question is where are we going as a country? Where does our strength lies? And what sort of world are we going to deal with? And here's my point, Dubal. And when I've divided the world into multipolar states, it is real. There's no question about it. Right now, as we're sitting down, we have invested so much with China. And what that means, huge debt that we have acquired through China. That's not for nothing. China is not going to sit back and say, I'm just giving you, I'm helping you. No country is interested in promoting another country. Every step we make in foreign diplomacy is for our own national interest. And China, everybody the same. We're getting into a tripolar world. Russia is coming back projecting its focus on Africa, selling weapons. Mm-hmm. America is coming back and saying, no, wait a minute, we've been your friend for years. How can you go east? And, this kind of thing. And China is saying, wait a minute, we are the one who build the bridges and everything up there. It's not going to be we will get benefit and sit back without that structure. So the question is, where does our strength lie? Our strength lies in ourselves. When you slaughter Kenya chicken going to Tanzania, and when you fight over Mgingo, when Rwandas and Ugandans are fighting, what else is left? And that's the point we're talking about. We must look inwards, and we must build the strength from inward so that we can deal with that.
Right, thank you. Let's hear from Ambassador.
I think this discussion amounts to one thing. We have politicized too much our foreign policy. Okay. Politicize it in the sense that we make it personal. Personal views tend to take precedent over national interest. If you take the premise that foreign policy is guided by the national interest of Kenya, you'll always find a bearing. You'll always find a place for Kenya's foreign policy any time in the world history. Take the case of the ideological problems between Kenyatta and Odinga.
Yes.
And I can tell you that as a fact, when Chinese Prime Minister Xu Enlai visited Africa in 1964, there was such a hue and cry in Kenya. Kenya even banned what they call Mao Zedong's Red Book. It's not a Red Book, it's just a matter of saying, whatever his pronouncements were. But we banned it, and I don't think it has been unbanned even today. It has not, and yet we are doing so much business with China now.
Maybe it's forgotten. The foreign affairs, maybe they need to pick up on that issue as well.
That's why it is important to look at the national interest and how it responds to the dynamics of international situation. That's how our foreign policy is built.
And you say the national interest is permanent?
Permanent and
eternal?
Eternal. Permanent and eternal because it consists of 5 core elements. First is sovereignty. And territorial integrity of the country. That is never going to change. Second is national security. Third is economic development. Fourth is national power. That includes the military, both in constitution and preparedness. And the rest is national prestige, sense of belonging to Kenya. You must be proud to be a Kenyan. That's what nationalism, nation building means. So we are dealing with a situation where it has been evolving, but I think it has been personalized to an extent that ethnicity has taken over.
Right.
We need to address the issues of domestic dynamics
Domestic dynamics.
in our foreign policy. We are looking at, we don't have so many Lui ambassadors, so many Luo ambassadors, so many Kikuyu ambassadors. That is immaterial. Foreign policy is about Kenya, is about the state, not about individuals.
Not about individuals. Let's flip over to page 26 even as we prepare to wind up. And I'm really enjoying this discussion. I think we shall continue with the same because we've looked at just Jomo Kenyatta. We've not looked at Daniel Arap Moi, Mwai Kibaki, and as well as Uhuru Kenyatta. And you say on page 26, because I think this is very pivotal, especially when we're having our country or North Korea and US caught up in this particular diplomatic spat as far as nuclear is concerned. And you say here that Kenya broke diplomatic relations with North Korea due to pressure from its Western allies and from South Korea on ideological grounds when it declared its ambassador persona non grata and ordered him to leave the country in 1968. Kenya went on to develop close economic ties with South Korea. The difference between Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Odinga played a role as the latter was apprehensive that Oginga Odinga would collude with North Korea to overthrow his government and introduce communism in Kenya. Under the Grand Coalition government, 2008, 2003, some Kenyan ministers visited North Korea, a fact that was out of step with Kenya's foreign policy. Since 1968, expulsion of its ambassador from Kenya. The visit did not bring about a shift in Kenya's foreign policy towards North Korea. And when we're having all this tension, strained with the US and North Korea, still this has not been lifted since 1968. How pivotal is it then for our country to maybe revisit this? Are we still, and we shudder, maybe if this nuclear thing continues, Kenya will be one of the people blacklisted by North Korea. Of course, my tongue firmly in cheek. I do not know, but do we need to address this as well?
Yeah, Debal, we need to make relations with all states based on our self-interest. That's an important foundation. I accept that premise. But we also do not need to make relations with rogue states.
Rogue states?
Yeah, rogue states. We also don't need to do that because we want to be, as the ambassador said, have prestige. And if we are dealing with states that flaunt every conventional international law, and we're there being buddies to them, the company you keep also defines who you are. So I think that at times there's maybe one or maybe two exceptions. But generally, our political, economic, and diplomatic interests should guide us in the relations that we have. But there's also, there's something called, the Americans call it American exceptionalism. The Americans sent troops to Somalia. They sent hundreds of thousands of troops to go and try and create state building. Not much self-interest was in there. A lot of people claim that it's about oil and all these things. I don't think so. There is a lot of issues around diplomacy that do not follow the straight line. Sometimes there's going to be major exceptions. I'm a great believer that we should have fundamental relations with Cuba. Donald Trump doesn't believe that. That doesn't make Cuba a rogue state. Cuba liberated South Africa. If Cuban troops were not in Angola to fight South African troops, Angola would not be free today, South Africa would not be free. It is Cuban soldiers who died there for an African cause. So if the West or the Europeans say you should not have relations with Cuba because it does ABC, I would say no, because we've had relations because these people have helped us in our national interest. So I think that, as Mr. Mbaya said, that Kenya has a history before independence.
Thank you.
We have a history, and that history was to fight for our freedom, to fight for justice. And our raison d'etre should also be in places where there are issues of justice and freedom. We should stand for those principles.
Right, thank you. Let's just get some closing remarks from Dr. Hassan Kanenje. All of us, just 20 seconds, closing remarks.
Yes, one thing that is captured actually in the foreword by Dr. Kitui, who wrote the foreword to the book also, and what's being advanced by the ambassador here, the importance of actually national unity. A country that is at war with itself and busy cannibalizing its own children at the expense of national security, or rather advancing national interest, will not have time to successfully be able to conduct his foreign policy. And unless we learn from that and actually change course, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to successfully advance our national interest in our foreign policy.
Thank you. Right. Let's hear from Ambassador Boaz. Just your closing remarks. We shall continue with the conversation next week. But your closing remarks, sir.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think something was mentioned about the future of foreign policy.
Yes.
How do we move on from here? We have talked about where we come from. One, it is very difficult to have a futuristic foreign policy because you don't know what the situation will be. But we must strategize to respond to the potential of whatever developments may occur in the world in order to align our foreign policy. Just as much as we hate to realign our foreign policy towards the East, look-East policy, in order to address the problem of what the traditional development partners have done to us. So my summary would be that Kenya is a state, the national interest continues, it is eternal, it has to remain the basis on which our foreign policy is going to be based.
Right. Rastas Moncha, briefly, your closing remarks.
The book comes out clearly to show that foreign policy has got two, forces. There is internal, which is, built on the values and the nation, the strength of the nation, and external. And the two, you cannot ignore the other. In fact, it shows clearly that Kenya has always put its policy in the context of what's happening globally, as articulated by Noah.
Thank you. Namidaba, finally.
Our strength in the future lies in forging allies with the 6 countries in East Africa.
Correct.
And conducting the foreign policy which bring mutual beneficial alliance with the West and constructive engagement with the East. And lastly, be flexible and adapt.
Thank you. 30 seconds. Hashi, 30 seconds.
I'd like to dedicate this show to the late Joe Marumbi. First Foreign Minister of Kenya, the guy who set the groundwork for where the Foreign Ministry would go. And the Foreign Ministry needs a new building, and it should be named the Joe Marumbi Building, and it should move out of downtown and go closer to State House where it can conduct its business with the presidency more effectively.